Forced to remove clothes. When the AC failed, the alien crew reacted with pure shock, the breakdown. Captain Elias Thorne stepped onto the bridge of the nebula's reach, his boots echoing softly against the metallic floor. The interstellar vessel was a marvel of galactic engineering, a sleek fusion of Zorathian crystal tech and Felinar alloy hulls, humming with the low thrum of warp engines. As the newest addition to the crew, Elias carried the weight of Earth's reputation on his shoulders. Humans were still rarities in the Galactic Alliance, often viewed as unpredictable upstarts with their relentless curiosity and unyielding spirit. "Welcome aboard, Engineer Thorne," boomed Commander Cale Droon, his green-scaled face twisting into what Elias hoped was a smile. Cale's voice was gravelly, like stones grinding in a riverbed, a trait of his reptilian heritage from the arid world of Draconis. Beside him stood technician Mira Sill, her lithe, fur-covered form fidgeting with a toolkit. Mira's golden eyes sparkled with mischief. She was the ship's fix-it genius, always one step ahead of any malfunction. Dr. Vex Nor hovered nearby, his adaptable limbs coiling like living vines as he adjusted a medical scanner. Vex's watery blue gaze assessed Elias with clinical detachment, typical of Aquilonians who prize logic over emotion. But it was Lyra Voss who captured Elias's attention. The Zorathian diplomat glided forward, her blue skin shimmering under the bridge lights like a sapphire ocean. Her long, flowing robes accentuated her graceful movements, and her violet eyes held a depth that spoke of ancient stars. "It's an honor to have a human among us," Lyra said, her voice melodic, carrying the faint echo of wind chimes. "I've studied your species' history. Your resilience is legendary." Elias grinned, feeling a spark of connection. "Likewise, Liaison Voss, Zorath's peace accords have kept the Alliance together. I'm here to keep the ship flying, not start any wars." The crew chuckled, easing the tension. As they settled into routines, Elias dove into diagnostics, his hands deftly navigating holographic interfaces. Lyra often lingered nearby, asking questions about Earth customs, her curiosity genuine. There was something magnetic about her, perhaps the way her blue hue flushed slightly when their eyes met, or how she laughed at his jokes about human barbecues. Days blurred into a comfortable rhythm, Cale barking orders, Mira tinkering in the engine room, Vex monitoring health stats. Elias shared stories of Earth's oceans and mountains, while Lyra described Zorath's crystal spires and bioluminescent seas. Subtle flirtations emerged, a brush of hands during a shared meal, lingering glances across the mess hall. Elias found himself drawn to her intellect and kindness, wondering if interspecies romance was as taboo as rumors suggested. Then, during a routine warp jump through the Veil Nebula, disaster struck. Alarms blared as the environmental controls flickered. "AC systems failing," Mira yelled from her console, her fur standing on end. Temperatures spiked rapidly, from a cool 22 degrees Celsius to a sweltering 35 in minutes. Sweat beaded on Elias's brow, but the aliens reacted differently. Kyle's scales dulled, his movements sluggish. Mira panted heavily, her fur matting. Vex's limbs trembled, losing their usual fluidity. Lyra clutched her robes, her blue skin glistening unnaturally. "The heat, it's oppressive. Our systems aren't designed for this." Panic rippled through the crew as readouts warned of cascading failures. Elias wiped his forehead, assessing the damage. The core coolant lines had ruptured, likely from nebula radiation. "We need to vent heat manually and prioritize repairs," he said calmly. But as the mercury climbed to 40 degrees, Elias knew drastic measures were coming. The aliens, bound by their physiologies and cultures, had no idea what humans did in such extremes. In the engine room, Elias stripped off his jacket, feeling the air kiss his skin. Lyra entered, her eyes widening slightly at his exposed arms. "Elias, how are you enduring this?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. He turned, meeting her gaze. "Humans adapt. We sweat it out, literally." She stepped closer, the heat amplifying the electricity between them. For a moment, the crisis faded, replaced by an unspoken pull. But the ship groaned, reminding them of the peril ahead.
Rising heat. The temperature hit 45 degrees Celsius and kept climbing. The nebula's reach had become a floating oven. Kale slumped against the bulkhead, his tongue lolling like a desert lizard's. Myra's fur was soaked flat against her body, her tail twitching in distress. Vex had retracted most of his tentacles into protective slits, leaving only 2 trembling limbs to clutch a coolant pack against his core. Elias peeled off his sweat-drenched shirt without ceremony and tossed it aside. The sudden blast of air on his skin felt like mercy. "Strip," he said simply. "Clothing traps heat. Skin breathes." Dead silence answered him. Myra's ears flattened. "You want us to disrobe? In front of the crew?" Kale's slit pupils narrowed to angry lines. "Humans truly have no sense of propriety." Vex merely blinked, too heat-drunk to form an opinion. Lyra stood frozen, arms wrapped around herself. Her ceremonial robes clung to every curve, the heavy silk now a torture device. Elias caught her eye. "Lyra, you're burning up. Let me help." He stepped close, voice low enough for only her. "I'm not asking you to bear everything. Just enough to survive." His fingers brushed the clasp at her shoulder. She inhaled sharply, violet eyes searching his. Something unspoken passed between them, trust, curiosity, the first flicker of desire. Slowly, she nodded. The robe slipped from her shoulders and pooled at her feet. Underneath she wore only a thin, sleeveless shift of Zorathian spider silk, translucent with sweat. The blue of her skin deepened where blood rushed beneath the surface. Elias's breath caught, she was breathtaking, heat-flushed and vulnerable and unafraid now. He guided her to a coolant vent, letting the weak stream wash over them both. Water beaded on her collarbones. One droplet slid down the valley between her breasts and vanished beneath the fabric. Their eyes locked. She reached up, fingertips tracing the sweat on his chest. "Your species cools itself, beautifully," she whispered. Behind them, Mira swore under her breath and yanked off her jumpsuit, revealing sleek black fur and surprisingly toned muscle. Kale growled but followed suit, scales gleaming as he shed his uniform jacket. Even Vex uncoiled enough to remove his outer membrane layer. The bridge looked like a fever dream, half-naked aliens staring at one human who seemed perfectly at home. Elias grinned despite the danger. "See? Still alive." Lyra's hand found his, fingers intertwining. "For now," she murmured, and the promise in her voice had nothing to do with temperature. Shock and adaptation. By hour 4 the ship registered 52 degrees Celsius. Consciousness flickered like a dying bulb. Elias and Mira worked side by side in the scalding engine corridor, passing tools slick with their own sweat. Every accidental brush of skin sent sparks neither acknowledged aloud. Myra's tail kept curling around his calf, an unconscious feliner gesture of trust that made him flush hotter than the air. In the medbay, Vex had fashioned crude evaporative bands from saline packs and tied them around the crew's necks and wrists. Kale refused at first, pride warring with survival, until he collapsed and woke to find Elias draping one across his scaled brow. The commander said nothing, but his clawed hand briefly squeezed Elias's forearm in silent gratitude. Lyra found Elias alone in the observation lounge, where emergency shutters had failed and the nebula's violet light painted their skin in surreal hues. She had abandoned even the shift, now only a narrow band of silk preserved minimal modesty. Elias's mouth went dry. "I can't breathe in anything more," she confessed, stepping close. "Your way, it works." He reached out, thumb brushing a bead of sweat from her temple. "You're stunning, Lyra. Every inch of you." Her laugh was shaky. "Zorathians do not reveal skin. It is, intimate. Sacred." "Then I'm honored," he said, voice rough. She rose on bare feet and kissed him, slow, exploratory, tasting salt and starlight. His hand settled at her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, her fingers tangled in his hair, his palms sliding down the smooth, cool warm expanse of her blue back. When they broke apart, foreheads touching, she whispered, "I want to know every human way of cooling down." A shudder rolled through the ship, another power surge. They clung together a moment longer, stealing strength from each other, then ran for engineering. Mira greeted them with a feral grin, now completely bare save for tool belt and fur. "About time you two showed up. Stop making out and help me reroute the tertiary coolant." Kale, stripped to the waist and glistening, actually snorted in amusement. The ice was breaking, literally and figuratively. The turning point. 58 degrees Celsius. The hull groaned like a living thing in pain. The main coolant manifold had crystallized and shattered. Standard repairs were impossible. Kale roared in frustration, claws scoring metal. Myra's paws were burned raw. Even Elias's vision blurred at the edges. Lyra pressed against his side, her skin almost fever-hot now. "There has to be something uniquely human you can do," she urged, lips brushing his ear. Elias stared at the ruined system, then at the emergency water reclamation tanks. A mad idea formed. "Everyone, strip the rest. We're turning ourselves into radiators." Under his direction, the crew drenched themselves from the tanks, then stood in front of every open vent and ruptured line. Human sweat plus alien body heat plus moving air created makeshift evaporative cooling. It bought minutes, precious minutes. While the others formed a living heat sink, Elias dove into the core alone. He used his own frozen breath, condensed in the one working cryoline, to refreeze and seal the shattered manifold, then jury-rigged a bypass using stripped wiring from non-essential systems and the metal clasps of Lyra's discarded robe. Sparks flew. His hands blistered. Lyra refused to leave his side, pouring the last of the water over his head, kissing his burned shoulders between breaths, whispering, "Come back to me, Elias. Come back." With a final, desperate twist, the bypass locked. Pumps stuttered, caught, and roared to life. Coolant surged. Temperature gauges began their glorious fall. He staggered out of the core, half-conscious, and Lyra caught him. She was crying and laughing at once, pressing her entire body to his as if she could pour life back into him through her skin. Mira whooped. Kale dropped to one knee, not in weakness, but respect. Vexed tentacles formed the Aquilonian salute. Elias managed a weary grin. "Told you, humans run hot." Lyra kissed him fiercely in front of the entire crew, no hesitation, no shame. "And we love you for it," she said against his lips. Resolution and aftermath. 20 hours later the nebula's reach sailed smooth and cool once more. The crew wore the barest minimum of clothing now, by choice, not necessity, and no one complained. In the captain's quarters, Elias and Lyra finally had privacy. The lights were low, the air a perfect 22 degrees Celsius. She stood before him in nothing but starlight through the viewport, blue skin luminous. "I almost lost you," she said, tracing the fresh med patches on his chest. "You didn't." He pulled her close. "And you never will." This time there was no hurry, no crisis driving them. He kissed her slowly, collarbone, throat, the soft spot beneath her ear that made her shiver. She sighed his name like a prayer. When he lifted her, her legs wrapped around his waist instinctively, and they sank onto the wide bunk together. Skin to skin, blue against sun-kissed tan, they learned each other with hands and mouths and whispered endearments in 3 languages. She tasted like salt and nebular ice, he felt like home and wildfire. When they finally joined, it was with a shared gasp that echoed through both their souls. They moved together in perfect rhythm, heat building again, but this time the kind they both welcomed. Afterward, tangled and sated, Lyra traced lazy circles on his chest. "My people will be scandalized when they hear I bared myself to save a ship." "Let them," Elias murmured, kissing her temple. "We just rewrote the rules of survival. And love." On the bridge the next cycle, Kale formally logged the incident, human physiological adaptability and unorthodox thinking directly responsible for saving vessel and crew. Mira added a winking emoji to the official report. Vex scheduled cultural exchange seminars, featuring optional attire. The Galactic Alliance would buzz for months about the day a single human taught an entire alien crew that sometimes the best way to beat the heat was to take everything off, and trust the ones beside you. Elias stood with Lyra at the forward viewport, her blue hand linked with his, watching the stars streak by. "Ready for the next crisis?" he asked. She smiled, wicked and warm. "As long as we face it together, preferably with fewer clothes." He laughed, pulled her close, and kissed her again. Somewhere in the galaxy, humanity's legend grew a little brighter, a little hotter, and a lot more beloved.